He found her where the light went to die, lying in the dust of his own doorway like a curse that had finally learned his name. An Apache woman stripped of everything, except the stubborn fact that she was still breathing. And the first thing that struck him was not her nakedness, but the look in her eyes. A look that said she had already walked past death and come back only because she had nowhere else to go. The cowboy stood frozen with the reins slack in his hand, the horse snorting as if it sensed the weight of the moment. Because the woman on the ground was supposed to be an enemy, a story told around fires with spit and fear. Yet here she was, broken, silent, and bleeding where the stones had bitten into her skin. He had buried men before sunrise and shot others before sunset. But he had never seen despair lying so still, daring the world to finish the job it had started. She did not flinch when he knelt beside her, did not cover herself, did not beg, and that terrified him more than any knife. Her body bore the map of violence, burns from rope, bruises shaped like hands, a deep cut along her thigh where someone had wanted her to run and then fail. The cowboy pulled off his coat and laid it over her, not out of kindness, he told himself, but because leaving her that felt like admitting he agreed with whatever had been done to her. Her eyes followed the movement, empty yet sharp, and when she finally spoke, her voice was so calm it felt wrong, saying she did not need saving, that she had already lost everyone worth mourning, and that if he wanted to shoot her now, at least do it clean. He carried her inside because the wind was turning cold and because the alternative was to leave her there, and that choice felt like a verdict on the man he still pretended to be. As he cleaned her wounds with shaking hands, memories clawed at him, raids, screams, smoke rising from villages that never made the maps, and he wondered how many times someone had looked at his work with the same hollow stare she wore now. She watched him without trust, without gratitude, as if she expected the next cruelty to arrive dressed as mercy. And when he offered water, she drank like someone who had already decided the world was done with her. Night fell heavy, and with it came the sound of distant drums, or maybe it was only his heart beating too loud in his ears. She told him her name at last, a name that meant something about dawn and ashes, and said her people were gone, slaughtered or scattered, her body taken as payment for crimes she had never committed. She said she had been dragged, traded, and thrown away when even her suffering lost its value. And when she finished, she lay back and stared at the ceiling as if waiting for the story to end with her. The cowboy sat by the fire, realizing that the violence he thought belonged to the past had followed him home, and knocked on his door wearing a human face. At dawn she tried to leave, staggering toward the horizon, with the coat slipping from her shoulders, and he stopped her not with force, but with the truth he had never spoken aloud, telling her he had nothing left either, that the land had taken his family and the war had taken his sleep, and that maybe, too, people with no reason left to live could still find a reason not to die today. She laughed then, a short, cracked sound that felt like glass breaking, and asked what kind of fool makes promises to a ghost. He did not answer, because fools were the only ones who ever built anything that lasted. When the men came riding, drawn by rumor and hate, she stood beside him instead of behind him, wrapped in his spare shirt. Her chin lifted like she was daring the world to remember she was still alive. The standoff was brief and ugly, words sharper than bullets, and when it ended, the dust was stained and the silence felt earned. She looked at him afterward, really looked this time, and something in her eyes shifted not to hope, but to the fragile idea that survival could be an act of defiance. Days turned into weeks, and she stayed, learning the shape of the land the way one learns the shape of a scar, slowly and without affection. He never asked her to be anything other than present, and she never thanked him. But sometimes she sat by the fire and spoke her people's stories into the dark so they would not vanish completely. One evening, as the sun bled out across the plains, she said she still did not know why she was alive, and he told her maybe the reason did not come first. Maybe it was built, board by board, from choices made when giving up would have been easier. She nodded, not convinced, but still there and in that quiet persistence, The cowboy understood that coming home had never been about returning to a place, but about standing beside someone who had every reason to disappear and choosing, again and again, not to let them. The trouble returned quietly, not with gunfire, but with signs that pressed against the edges of her sleep. And one night she woke knowing it was finished running and ready to end. By morning the tracks were there, clear enough to read like a threat. And when he spoke of leaving, she stopped him with a calm that felt final, saying she would not spend the rest of her life fleeing from men who had already taken everything else. If this was where it ended, she said, then it would end with her standing. Not dragged, not begging, not broken. He saw then that whatever emptiness had once lived inside her had turned into resolve, and there was no talking her out of it. They prepared fast and without drama, moving like two people who understood that fear wasted time. When the attack came at dusk, it was brutal and short, the air tearing open with sound and smoke, and she fought beside him with a focus that left no room for doubt or mercy. When it was over, the land was quiet again, but different, as if it had finally been paid what it was owed. She stood there breathing hard, then slowly lifted her face to the sky and let go of a sound that carried grief, rage, and release all at once. And when it faded, something inside her seemed to settle. That night she told him she was done being a ghost, done letting the past decide how long she was allowed to live. She did not speak of forgiveness or peace, only of choice, saying that surviving was not enough anymore. She wanted to move forward, even if the road was hard and the end unclear. He listened and realized that the house had served its purpose, not as a home, but as a place where two broken lives had stopped, bleeding long enough to decide what came next. At dawn, they rode out together, leaving the land behind without looking back. Not escaping, not chasing hope, just choosing motion over surrender. She sat tall in the saddle, eyes fixed ahead, no longer a woman with no reason to live, but one who had claimed the right to keep going. And the cowboy understood then that the story did not end in violence or rescue, but in the quiet, defiant act of continuing on.